Yeah, so I just wanted to get us all together because I think it'd be more efficient for us to just have a quick conversation rather than go back and forth on the issue. So Derek raised some concerns about the Peach documentation around how we want to position fuzzing alongside some of the DAST capabilities. Um, and I think it makes a lot of sense. If we put all the DAST stuff and the fuzzing stuff together, it might confuse users about which one's which. So what we want to do moving forward is for the initial fuzzing releases, have the docs only mention the fuzzing capabilities and the fuzzing related profile information. Over the next couple of iterations, what we then want to focus on is surfacing those DAST style results and making them look like DAST found them as part of like the vulnerability dashboard jobs, so it looks like we now have API DAST as a new capability rather than, the Peach engine does both DAST and fuzzing. Because even though from a technology standpoint, it's doing both, we want to make sure that that's a different sort of experience and presentation from a user perspective.
Did you just want to add them to our document from this morning where we discussed it, Sam? That way we have notes for this one too.
Yes, that sounds like a good idea.
So Sam, let me recap kind of what you're saying. So we would have the DAST and fuzzing eventually, but for the API out of Peach, and then DAST. What is DAST today? We would focus on just the web application, not necessarily the API.
So we'd still have the same underlying technology, but we would talk about the DAST portion of it alongside the ZAP functionality that we also have in DAST. So if you want to do,
sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. Yeah, I was just gonna say. So I think that it's more of a user-facing split than it is anything else. We wouldn't be showing any DAST-related information in the fuzzing area, at least not initially. And then, we'd integrate Peach into DAST. I think that the big thing there is just making sure that the results show up as DAST results. So when you configure a DAST API scan that uses Peach, it doesn't come back as a fuzzing test found this. But so yeah, I don't think that we would have the DAST capabilities within fuzzing. Maybe eventually we could figure out a way to have those kind of combined to where you could run both of the tests at the same time, but the results would still need to be somehow split up so that users aren't confused as to why am I getting DAST results in my fuzz test.
that makes sense.
Yeah, so it makes sense that you would, we'd always want to have fuzzing results, which would be strictly fuzzing results. And then anything that's a DAST result, regardless of the fact that it came from Peach, would come up as a DAST result. So I think that totally makes sense. That's obviously, that's easier said than done because it's one scan. And so, for example, when Peach runs, it doesn't care whether it's fuzzing or whether it's a DAST check. It's just going to return those results. So we'd have to figure out somewhere in Peach to say, what kind of result is it? Okay, it's this kind of result. We're going to output this report. It's this kind of result. We'll output the other type of report. So there'll be some work to do within Peach in order to output that. It sounds like we're not quite there yet. So it may be worth having some more discussion as we get there.
So can I ask you a question, or maybe it's more of a question of Mike? My understanding was that it's a configuration option. You can tell the API security engine to not run traditional DAST tests, like however that's defined. So I don't know if it's necessarily, if that's the case, I don't know if it's necessarily extra work as much as if you're configuring API fuzzing, you're only configuring fuzzing settings and not traditional DAST settings. And then when Mike is ready to start working with Isaac and Derek on integrating it in for DAST API specific functionality, at that point, we would not be setting fuzzing configuration. We'd only be setting the DAST API configuration.
Right. I think what Seth was alluding to is, since we're already using the DAST report schema, so as we do our fuzzing results, how does the backend queue between the two types of findings? Since we're now saying that we want the fuzzing findings to show up differently than the DAST findings. So there's going to have to be some indicator for how the backend should handle those.
Right, but I think that if you don't mix the two, like you have a fuzz test and a DAST test in the same configuration in the same test, then you could use that input, that configuration input that says, hey, I want to run the DAST checks versus the fuzz test, and then output a object based on that. I don't know. I mean, I don't know. Do we deal with the metadata around like the JSON report in the engine, or is that done in like the Ruby code or outside of the actual scanner?
Yeah, so I think we want to handle that outside the scanner, because what we're proposing is you run two different scans, right? You run a DAST scan or you run a fuzzing scan based on the configuration. Right. The engine's written that it could run both at the same time. Ideally, from an efficiency perspective and for a customer perspective, you just run one scan. And so if you configure both those, we shouldn't fire up Peach, run one type of scan, and then fire up Peach again and run another type of scan. So what we should really do is probably focus on really not doing much different on Peach and focus on the results. So Peach would output all that data, and then Peach would just tag it with a particular metadata, whatever we decide, that says, hey, it's a fuzzing result or it's a DAST result. And frankly, I think for the most part, that's there already because it's just using different checks. And then the front end, the Rails code would say, okay, I'm going to display it this way, or I'm going to display it that way.
Yeah. In fact, all the fuzzing checks currently have the word fuzzing in them. So we would, we wouldn't necessarily have to add any new metadata to the schema. It could be a purely back-end sorting mechanism.
And I think
I do want to make it clear we're asking for essentially two things here, both a short-term as well as a longer-term ask. For the first version of API fuzzing, what we're asking for is not new development essentially, but to just remove the DAST references from the doc as well as those template files that users are going to copy. Mm-hmm. That being a first step that we can do orthogonally from the thing we're talking about now, where we're actually splitting those results out. So I just want to make sure that's clear. We're talking about two different sets of deliverables.
Yeah, I think that's clear. And actually, after Derek's comment yesterday, I went back and did exactly that. So the current rev of those docs, if you want to look at them, have no mention of DAST. And I trimmed down a configuration file. I was able to remove all mentions of any of the DAST checks from it entirely. And that's also kind of up on the API fuzzing repo, so you can take a look at that. Seth had mentioned the possibility of including up on that site also a DAST-enabled configuration file that could either be used by us for testing or if someone wanted to explore that functionality. I'm not sure how you guys think of that.
I'm not quite sure I understand that statement.
Yeah, so in the documentation, right, it refers to a configuration file. Mm-hmm. And it's right now, based on the update Mike just did, it's just a fuzzing configuration file. But where that file lives, there's a folder with a bunch of other configurations, including some that have a DAST configuration in there. So my thought is we can leave all of those configurations. Those are all Peach configurations. They're all valid. But not document any of those configurations, so that if someone wanted to switch over to a different configuration file, they could get DAST results, but not necessarily document those. The benefit to that is, like, Derek, if you wanted to run it, you could just change your configuration name and you get DAST results to see what it would look like. But that, again, that wouldn't be documented in the setup.
But would it not pull those results back into a fuzzing report as opposed to a DAST report?
So that's kind of the unknown. It's just a quick place to leave those files to start playing around with stuff.
I guess, I mean, I don't mind having the files around. I don't know if it makes sense to have them exposed to external users right now, because I think that it could be still confusing if they go to that configuration folder and they look at all the different templates. I don't know, it might still be confusing even if it's not in the docs. I don't know, Sam and David, what do you think?
Yeah, because if we send someone to a folder from our documentation, they're going to look at everything in there. And unless it's, clearly like the three things in there are what they can use, they're going to be confused by what are these other things here? Or what am I missing in the docs? So I think if there are those template files, we should move them to a different project or just remove them from the directory that we, send users to with the documentation. So, I mean, if the engine still has the functionality, we're not asking to remove any engine functionality for this, essentially just not publishing it externally for this version. If we have those template files internally for us to look at, because I'm sure Derek has experiments he wants to run or whatever, that's fine. We just don't want users seeing them and getting confused about them. What do y'all think?
Yeah, that makes sense to me. That's I think that's probably the best way forward right now, especially since we're going to be using Peach in DAST. I think that, having that available, even just as hey, it's here, could get very confusing especially once we start to roll it out, because then it's like, do I use what's already there in fuzzing? Do I go to DAST? How do I configure this scan?
Sounds good.
Okay.
I guess in a way, Mike, I hope this makes hitting your milestones easier, because you're only going to be worried about the fuzzing part of the API security. And then, like Seth, Todd's going to talk to you about the proposal of switching to Peach and Browser for DAST. I met this morning, so whenever he does that, like I look at this API security for Derek's need as kind of outside Mike's milestones for fuzzing. So I think they can just be matched up with that.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, certainly the narrower scope, it makes it easier to know what we got to do.
Okay. Well, those were the main points I wanted to cover with this. We still have 15 minutes left. Anything else we want to talk about while we're together?
Well, I guess one thing is, as we think about how DAST can incorporate Peach. So right now, when you configure DAST, you plug in your URL, and then there's another variable, which is your open API specification. So one of the ideas is that right there could be potentially where we take a different path. So if you plug in a URL, we go with Zap. If you plug in that open API specification, today that's going through Zap, and we do the scan through Zap. But that could be a very easy thing that we say, hey, if you have an open API specification, boom, don't load up Zap. We're going to load up Peach, and then run the scan through Peach. So to me, that's probably the quickest way and a very natural way to integrate Peach with what we're doing. We could do that pretty quickly. And to me, the big step from a product perspective would be figure out, what's the delta in terms of the benchmark, right? What does Zap show? What does Peach show? If Peach is showing more, boom, we're ready to go. And then we've got a couple technical things to figure out to do that. But it's a very clean line to implement it right there.
Yeah, it makes sense. And yeah, just as a MVC initial implementation, that makes total sense to me. I think if Peach is showing more in terms of the vulnerabilities, I think we'd quickly want to use the add on the other entry points, I guess, the HAR files and things like that, being able to supply those and do, as well as enable SOAP and GraphQL scanning, since those are already supported in Peach. So yeah, but I think that makes total sense to just switch that over when we get a good idea of what, I guess, what we're missing, if there's any gaps in terms of features between Peach and Zap that we would lose I kind of doubt that there is, because I know that Zap's API functionality is not incredibly robust. So it seems like there probably isn't, but we probably need to do that analysis to make sure, and then do that benchmarking, which Mike and I actually talked about yesterday. So yeah, we could. I think that as soon as we do that and we figure out the whole splitting off the DAST results and making sure they show up in the report as, you know, being run from DAST, that I mean, I see this as being a pretty quick integration once we have time to work on it, both between the DAST team and Mike.
So I did dig up those benchmarks we talked about yesterday. Qualys
Cool.
was the scanner I'd forgot the name of. So I did these benchmarks before Zap could take an open API specification. So there might be a real difference now, but at the time I ran it, Zap didn't find any application bugs in the API. The only thing it could identify was like a missing header that helped secure IE old versions. And it came back with, 3 non-interesting findings and I think 7 false positives. Burp came back with, pretty much the same. It came back with like a TLS configuration error, no application security bugs. Acunetics came back with blind SQL. So it found at least an SQL issue in there. It didn't have any false positives and 4 findings. And then didn't see the numbers on Qualys, but I remember Qualys being pretty similar. In terms of getting Acunetics running, you couldn't actually do the normal configuration to get an API to work. They had to download a special proxy tool they provide and record your API traffic and then upload that, which wasn't documented anywhere.
Super useful.
Yeah. And, Burp and Zap did not work out of the box. You had to go in and tweak a bunch of settings to get them to even see full APIs in your recorded traffic. So I'll be really interested to see what the difference is now that they support open API docs specifications.
Yeah.
Can you put those results, Mike, somewhere like on Drive so we can all see them?
Sure.
Well, and for the benchmarking too, we can start looping in the vulnerability research team. I know that they've done a lot of work on making a test harness for evaluating tools on a bunch of different web apps, and they did it with Zap initially, so we already have a good baseline to compare against.
Right. I don't think that we have a baseline for Zap for API scans. At least when I looked, I couldn't find anything. I couldn't even find like a test project or a test application for the API. So Seth, I don't know if you know what we tested it against when we did our initial implementation.
I'm not sure. I'd have to check. Are you talking about the original benchmark that was done a while back?
No, when we first introduced API scanning. So the ones that I've seen have all been on the actual application on the API running
So the API application, at least on the DAST team, has not done a benchmark. Like we've got a built-in test, which has got kind of fake vulnerability, but that's not really a benchmark. I think Isaac did have some benchmarks that he set up. We can check in with him.
I just put the link to those in the Zoom chat if you all want to check those out. So it's against the damn vulnerable web app, WebGoat, and then budget app.
Yeah, do any of those, I thought that all of those were actually the web app benchmarks, not the API benchmarks. I can't remember.
Yeah, I'm not sure.
Yeah, and I believe it's darn vulnerable. I don't think we're allowed to say damn.
It's actually the David's vulnerable web app.
That sounds about right.
So the other thing that we'll need to think about too is once we start moving over to our own scanners, any new vulnerabilities that come out, right? We're not really subscribing to any database or it's not like we're getting the latest version of Zap. So that's something that our vulnerability research team, I think, would be needing to lead us on, of saying, hey, there's a new, whatever it is, tab napping or SQL injection or vulnerability, providing that vulnerability definition, and then we would need to be writing the code to implement that. It's not something that I think we're set up to do right now, at least in DAST or fuzzing. but something that we'll need to gear up for.
I sure hope if they're suggesting we move to Browserker and Peach API Security, they realize they're signing up for that.
Yeah, so we can confirm to make sure that's explicit. We've worked with some of the other groups like SCA though to bring in new data feeds to populate for them to check against. So, they've gone through that exercise. We'll just have to point out where we want to look at those feeds from, and then, they can put a process together to import them like they do with the other ones.
Yeah, and I think on our side, we'll just have to figure out the SLA, right? Like if a new vulnerability comes out for maybe a particular browser with a header, how fast that gets into our engine.
Mm-hmm. I think our current SLA is 5 business days, and that's one of the metrics that team actually tracks. There's a graph somewhere in the engineering handbook. So yeah, I don't think, what I'm trying to say is I don't think this is going to be something completely out of left field or brand new for this team. I think we should be able to solve this in a pretty straightforward manner.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, they're doing it on yeah, they're doing it on composition analysis. It's just, it'll be new for us.
Mm-hmm.
All right, cool. Yeah, I don't think that I've got anything else. I think that it's all pretty clear what we need to do, what the next steps are. And I mean, the timeline maybe isn't quite as clear just because we're finishing up other stuff in DAST and the fuzzing area as well. So once we get a better view of the timeline and when everybody has time for this, I think that we'll know better. But I think it seems like, to me at least, next steps are pretty clear.
All right. I think it sounds like we're all good then. I'll post a link to this video recording once it converts or whatever into the issue, so we have it, as well as a summary of these notes. But thanks everyone for hopping on. Appreciate the time.
All right.